Let the torch of freedom burn.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The constitutions of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that is their right and duty, to be at all times armed, and that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live. We're talking about today's hottest topics on policy and faith, other areas of the culture, but always looking at those things from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. Especially today, Foundations of Freedom Thursday. It's a great time to dive into those foundational principles with David Barton. He's America's premier historian and our founder here at WallBuilders. Also with Tim Barton, national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. And my name's Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. You can find out more about us all at wallbuilderslive.com. That's our website where you can get links to the archives over the last few weeks. You can also get lists of our radio stations across the country where we can be heard. And you might want to share some of those links. You like a program, share it with your friends and family. Help get them educated and inspired and equipped to make a difference in the culture, to be good citizens, to be salt and light, and help restore our constitutional republic and pass it intact to the next generation. Now, there's one specific thing I'm going to ask you to do before we dive into the questions on this Foundations of Freedom Thursday, and that is go to wallbuilderslive.com and consider making that one-time or monthly contribution. It makes this program possible, and it helps us to do all those things I've already mentioned in terms of equipping and inspiring people to train legislators and young leaders and pastors and all the other folks that we work with. And you get to be a part of that when you go to wallbuilderslive.com and make that contribution. All right, guys, before we get into some of the questions from today, we got several we're going to try to dive into. We've actually got one that's not a question, but sort of a statement. And I love the subject line. Thank you for reteaching law school, which actually that's how I felt when I got to know David and WallBuilders and got to know the truth. Anyway, here's what the email says. I wanted to thank everyone, David, Rick, and Tim especially, for presenting this information on a daily podcast.
Wait a minute, Rick. Why did they say Tim especially?
I don't know. I was wondering that myself.
This is why I thought we needed to read this one today.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just wanted you guys to know that somebody, this is probably the only person, actually, I don't know who this is yet. Maybe it's my wife, but somebody appreciates me, so let's keep going. This is great.
I was thinking the youngest, the best looking, the best shot, whatever. Anyway, for some reason, they especially liked him. But here we go. For presenting this information on a daily podcast, y'all always frame it for the regular patriot to learn, but I was near the top of my class in law school, and none of it is redundant for me. Not only did I never learn these facts, I learned false information. But between the WallBuilders and Ben Shapiro podcast, I am unlearning and relearning my JD the right way. That's a doctor of jurisprudence out there, folks. Anyway, he says, no wonder con law was so hard. That's Constitution law class. I remember that being boring myself. If they told me it was all political and made it up, it would have been so much easier to understand. Now I'm explaining con law to impromptu crowds of students next to me at the March for Life. Thank you deeply. My husband has an MD, and we often lament that in the 16 years of college between us, we never once learned the basic history. No wonder the elites are all so liberal. So I try to pump as much of the show into him as he has time to overhear at breakfast each morning. Thanks to WallBuilders, our children will not have this same knowledge gap. I used to tell people not to go to law school or to send their kids, or they'd come out socialist and broke. But armed with your new optimistic approach to working the system for the good of conservatives, that is changing. God bless y'all. You'll continue to get our support for years, from donations to frontside trips to Founders Bibles to my new inspiration to become a Constitution coach. Cheers and blessings from your most loyal Texas expats in Kansas. So they're in Kansas, but they're from Texas. That's where all that wisdom comes from. David, Tim, I got to tell you, this email actually mirrors my experience. I mean, I went to law school, University of Texas. But when I started listening to you guys and getting a chance to be in that library and getting those original documents, it as she said, unlearned. I mean, it got rid of all the bad information and brought in the good information. So just so thankful for this email and that good news out there. And this is happening to thousands of folks across the country that are listening as well. So actually, I want to take that thank you and shift it. Yes, Tim, especially, of course, because she singled you out, Tim. But David, man, I'm so thankful that God spoke to you 30 years ago and that you started WallBuilders and that you've brought this truth back to folks.
Yeah, it's a good deal. And I love the fact that, as she points out, we really do build this for the average patriot, the average citizen. This is not difficult stuff. You do not have to have a JD or a con law class to understand the Constitution, the way it's written and what the founders did with it, the way it's been applied in history. That's all easy stuff that every single citizen can get. And that's been our objective, is to demystify some of this stuff and bring it down to where that it does have daily application. And it sounds like that's working. It sounds like people are understanding that. So we really appreciate that.
And not only demystifying it, making it fun. You know, I mean, we've talked on the program about how most people, and certainly my experience in history class or government class, was boring. But what you did that was unique, and I think others are now, modeling, is that you tell history through the eyes of the people that experience it. You bring it to life. You make it fun and exciting, and that causes people to pay attention. Where in an entertainment age, if we can't grab their attention and them, stay with us for the story, then it doesn't do any good. So I just think that's been a unique gift that God gave you and has been passed on, hopefully, to Tim and to me and to a whole bunch of other folks that take your materials and share them with others. So what a blessing. Great email. Thank you. I love the Texas expats living in Kansas. That's like a mission field, right? Texans going into other parts of the country to share the good news. All right, guys, we went on too long here. We're going to take our first break. So stay with us, folks. We'll be right back for that first question. It has to do with President Trump and legal authority, our responsibility to even make that Ukraine call that there's been so much about. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to WallBuilders Live on Foundations of Freedom Thursday.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. With the upcoming elections is an opportunity to change the direction of our nation for the better or the worse, to change the very future that our children will face. In previous generations, it was this concern for our children which often guided our vote. In a sermon before the Connecticut legislature in 1803, the Reverend Matthias Burnett reminded us, "To you voters, in whose power it is to save or destroy your country, consider well the important trust which God has put into your hands. To God and posterity you're accountable for them. Let not your children have reason to curse you for giving up those rights and prostrating those institutions which your fathers delivered to you. In this year's elections, for the sake of our children and the type of country that we will leave them, vote, and vote wisely."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
We're back here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us on Foundations of Freedom Thursday. First question to toss to David and Tim is about the Ukraine call that took place. It comes from Denise. It says, did President Trump have the legal authority and or responsibility to ask a foreign country to look into a U.S. citizen's involvement in previous government issues? In other words, the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Ukraine prosecutor, and whether or not to give more money or aid to that country based on whether that corruption had stopped. So great question. Is this within President Trump's Article 2 authority and the Constitution, guys?
Well, before we even answer that, let me ask a political question that kind of deals with this, because this was the basis of the impeachment charges and the exoneration. They didn't, and I say exoneration in the sense they didn't get enough votes to impeach. So he's now cleared as not guilty, but the impeachment's still there. So they went after him because they said he's checking into Joe Biden for the presidential race. So
which clearly is not a problem.
Which is not a problem. No, that's right. Exactly. But let's say it had gone the other direction. I don't know if Mike Pence has a son or not, but we're going to play for scenario that Mike Pence has a son. Let's say that the Democrats found out that Mike Pence, his son is over in Ukraine and is using American government dollars and is using them by the billions, and corruption is going on over there. And let's say that President Trump did not intervene and did not ask the questions he asked the Ukrainian president. If it had been a Republican and he had not asked the questions, do you think Congress would have come after him and tried to impeach him for not asking questions of the Ukrainian president? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. If it had been a Republican doing the same thing and Trump had turned his head, I think they would have said that's an impeachable offense. So I think first thing is this is not so much a constitutional question as a political question.
Yeah. And to the point of political question, I do think we live in such a polarized time that it would depend on who's in charge of Congress as to whether that impeachment went through.
That's right.
Because even if it was Republicans in charge, although historically when impeachments have taken place, several of them have included Republicans impeaching a Republican president because they had the character and integrity to go, no, what you're doing we don't like, we think it's wrong, we think it's unconstitutional. In this day and age, I mean, right, Nancy Pelosi, her kids get paid a lot of money for what level of
how do people
benefit they provide? I don't know.
How do people become almost billionaires on a $141,000 a year salary?
Yeah. Well, and right, it's true with Chuck Schumer, right? If Mitt Romney, there's a lot of elected officials, former government, current government, and their kids are making a lot of money. So this has kind of become a way of life for many in those high up positions. So it's not unusual in that sense that Joe Biden's son gets a really cushy job, gets paid ridiculous amounts of money in a field that he was never involved in, has no educational background in, has no formal training in, but getting paid all kinds of money. So nonetheless, you're right. Politically, I think if the Democrats were in charge, a Republican did this, or a Republican in charge, a Democrat does it, for sure they're going to crucify whatever side because it is very political at this point.
And Tim, you point out that it's been going on in both parties and different. I mean, that's part of the cynicism in the country. That's part of why everybody was so thrilled that an outsider like Trump got elected. Is you just start to feel like it's going on everywhere.
That's exactly why Trump got elected, because people are recognizing how much the swamp has not just infected one party. No, this isn't. And really, I mean, people that have been there very long, they've been impacted and affected by this swamp. And although we have some very good friends that are up there, and we would say they're people of character, generally people of faith, they're in the very small minority when it comes to people that have not been touched by some of this power, some of this wealth, greed, whatever the case is. I mean, this is just kind of the way Washington has been for a long time, and that's exactly why Trump got elected.
Now, if you take this from a different perspective, ignore the political side. Is there a constitutional responsibility for a president to say, you know what, the U.S. Congress gave you billions of dollars. I have a moral and a constitutional responsibility to make sure that that is used the way it was intended and directed.
Well, and on top of this, right, I mean, I think that what we're ultimately leading to is the quid pro quo. And I had a discussion with somebody just in the last couple of weeks, and they were saying, now, wait a second, he really did do this quid pro quo. And I said, now, let's understand some context here. Because what if, let's say, we were giving money to, right, choose another nation, Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia.
Venezuela.
Right, but let's say that is a nation where there is known terrorism, and we know the government's funding terrorism. We said, hey, we're not going to give you the aid you need. If you're taking this aid and you're doing terrorist activity with it, you're going to have to stop your terrorism before we give you this. The quid pro quo is not a problem. In fact, we would say that should be the case.
That's right.
You shouldn't give money.
That's right.
If you know they're going to use it for corrupt purposes. So the problem is not the quid pro quo. The problem is what that quid pro quo was about. And right, I mean, even Trump, both sides have said it really wasn't what people have said it was, whatever. But let's, just for the sake of discussion, okay, now let's say it was a quid pro quo, which, again, that's not what either side says it was.
That's not what the Senate found anyway.
Well, that's not what either side says it was as far as either side of the phone call, right? It's not what the Ukrainian leader or Trump says. Either side of the phone call, they don't say it's what it was. But even if it was, the only reason that would be a problem is if the quid pro quo was, hey, I'm not going to give you this money unless you destroy my political rival. But that's not even what the phone call was about. Trump said, right, he ran on this kind of platform of draining the swamp, which interestingly, the new Ukrainian leader ran on a platform of ridding corruption. And Trump says, hey, I know there's been a lot of corruption. I've heard about corruption because Rudy Giuliani was over there digging into a lot of stuff. He says, hey, I've heard about some corruption. Burisma, Hunter Biden, you might need to check in. As you're looking at corruption, you might need to check into this. That might be important for you. That is not at all related, because at that point, Joe Biden hadn't even announced, right, anything of a presidential run. So there's no knowledge that he could be a presidential candidate. So the idea the quid pro quo was to destroy a political rival. At this point, Joe Biden's not a political rival. He's not running for office. And Trump ran to get rid of corruption. This guy ran to get rid of corruption. So the whole thing in context is not at all what people think it is. And even the idea of quid pro quo is not unconstitutional. It's just how it's used.
That's right. One other thing I'll throw out, Tim, you mentioned they kind of drained the swamp there. About 6 years ago, I was asked to go to Ukraine. They were wanting to write a new constitution. So I went there, spoke to their legislators, parliamentarians, spoke to their religious leaders, spoke at law schools, government schools, etc. I just last week accepted an invitation to go back to Ukraine and do it again because they've had more than 80% of the members of their parliament replaced in the recent election. So that is draining the swamp. I mean, taking 80% change thereabouts. And so I'm back again with a different group of leaders. But that is part of draining the swamp. And Tim, you're exactly right. That's why Trump was elected here. That's what was going on there. At the time they brought me 6 years ago, they were trying to figure out how to handle the corruption then. And do you have suggestions on how to handle corruption? And I had suggestions, and they didn't really like it because they had American missionaries. And I say that because the thing I said was, guys, you're a 90% Christian nation. If you churches will absolutely get your voters educated and not elect corrupt leaders, then you won't have corruption. They said, yeah, but we're Christians. We're not supposed to get involved in government. I said, where'd you hear that? American missionaries. Thanks a lot, America. So even though they're 90% Christian nation, 90% professing Christian, they openly call themselves a Christian nation, the church has been very reticent to get involved in stopping corruption over there. So the people said, okay, if the church won't, we'll just throw out 80% of the bums and do it ourselves. So we'll see if the church will step up and take some moral authority and moral responsibility there. But Tim, you're exactly right. They had a massive sea change in the Ukraine, and this is really one anti-corruption leader speaking to another anti-corruption leader about, hey, you might want to know some corruption going on in your nation.
As we're headed to break, I was thinking of one more, Tim, one more example of where the quid pro quo would have been wrong, and that was if Donald Trump Jr. had a business thing going on in Ukraine, and he was making $1 million a year being on the board of some company, and we're saying, hey, get rid of the prosecutor that's investigating my son's company.
Oh yeah, you definitely you should never do that. That's totally wrong.
Yeah. That's what Trump did, right? Didn't Trump do that? No,
that was somebody else.
Did somebody else do that?
On break, let's think about it. See if we can figure out who that was.
Yeah, we might come up with the answer. Maybe folks at home could send in an email and help us out with it. Seems like some public official from the U.S. did something like that. Quick break. We'll be right back. We got a few more questions, a lot more questions. We're not going to get to all of them today, but you can send them in radio at wallbuilders.com, and we'll hopefully get to it next week. We'll be right back, folks. You're listening to WallBuilders Live on Foundations of Freedom Thursday.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
We're back here on WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday today, and we're going to get to more of your questions, but I'm just wondering how we did on the break. Did anybody come up with the answer to this question? Is there a public official out there that had a son making millions of dollars in Ukraine and held up $1 billion for Ukraine until the prosecution stopped investigating his son?
Well, whoever it was, for sure, is a lying dog-faced pony soldier.
Or accusing others of being lying dog-faced pony soldier. I've never heard that expression
there's
before.
There's some connection to lying dog-faced pony soldier and funding in Ukraine and son company corruption. I'll work on it.
And anybody who doesn't know, just Google it, and it'll come up instantly. And it is a little clip with Vice President Biden, a presidential candidate, making that statement in a town hall kind of meeting. So it's that's a viral one.
And Rick, to your point, right? Joe Biden was the one that did that, which seems then incredibly ironic that he is criticizing Trump for, he says Trump tried to do the thing that he actually did. So Trump didn't even do it.
That's an impeachable offense if you try and don't do it. I guess that's
Trump
a problem.
didn't even do it, right, on the level that he's talking about. Anyway, it really, really silly. And this, again, goes back to the whole drain the swamp idea, because there's so much corruption, so many problems with elected officials, really many on both sides of the aisle. But we have very limited time for another question.
Here it is, and it's right along those lines. Is there a way Congress can get rid of the swamp creatures like Pelosi, Schumer, Schiff, AOC, etc. Why can they not clean up their act? Americans are sick of the Democrat Party. I think that question actually represents a lot of people out there. They're frustrated. They're frustrated with what they're watching. Why can't we drain the swamp, or can we?
Well, and Rick, it's significant the way the question was worded is, can't Congress do something to drain the swamp? Congress can't do anything to drain the swamp because they are the swamp. And this is where so often we look at the national level for a solution instead of recognizing the best solutions lie at the local level. And we are the ones responsible for draining the swamp. We have to elect the right kind of people who will go in and not do the games that are played, right? Not join into kind of the quid pro quo is what everybody does. We do it this way. You get this out of it. And so this is something I would say the answer lies really with we, the people. We have to be the ones to do that, which means we also have to be the ones engaging and voting in the process. And unfortunately, even though right now everybody is frustrated with the process, right? Both sides of the aisle, Democrat, Republican, you pick a party, everybody's frustrated. The problem is most people are not educated enough to understand how the process works. So they keep voting for the same people, hoping to get different results. And that is right, borderline definition of insanity. You can't keep doing the same thing and think it's going to change. So we have to be the ones helping find different people that have a different set of values. And we would say certainly a biblical set of values, a constitutional set of values. And we have to help get them running for office, get them elected, because only once we get different individuals in Congress will Congress ever change.
Yeah, I would even go a little further than that and say, yeah, Tim is exactly right. If you want to get rid of the swamp creatures, it's called elections. But the statement is Americans are sick of the Democratic Party. Is there a way to get rid of Pelosi and Schumer and Schiff and Waters and etc.? Okay, if they're sick of the Democratic Party, why is it the last election they sent 24 Republicans home and gave the House to Nancy Pelosi? If they are sick of the Democratic Party, then why didn't that show up in the elections? Because they're not. Why is it that Pelosi gets reelected every single session? Because the people who send her there like her. Why do they keep making her the Speaker of the House? Because the Democrats who are sent by the people like Pelosi. So this is not a drain the swamp kind of stuff. This is, we have in our hand the ability to pull the plug in the bathtub and drain the swamp. But until we do that, and I think the characterization is wrong in saying that Americans hate the Democratic Party. They don't. They just put the Democratic Party in charge. Now, maybe it'll change this election, but that's how you drain the swamp.
And I don't think it's far-fetched to say that Americans hate what's going on. Yeah. Right? They are frustrated. They hate it. But again, I think the problem is they don't understand that when you keep electing the same people, you keep getting the same issues, same problems, same drama, same results. And even though the majority of America might not like Pelosi, it doesn't matter if the majority of America does or doesn't like her. It matters if the people in her district like her or don't like her. But if you don't want to see her in power anymore, the way to get her out of power is we have to get more Republicans that are elected to Congress and Democrats that are elected to Congress. And this is where there's a lot of people listening to us right now that are in states where some of those are kind of swing either way, right? As we're looking at elections coming up this year, there will be a lot of opportunities for some challenges, or maybe some really good people that are in Congress that are going to be challenged, that your vote is going to make a difference which direction our nation, our Congress is going to go. And if we want to see it changed, again, we have to be the ones to help bring part of that change about.
Yeah, and what happened last election, out of 435 congressional seats across the nation, there were 24 seats where the people said, you know, we've had Republicans, we want Democrats instead. And that's what gave Nancy Pelosi the speakership, is because across the nation there were districts. Well, if people don't like that, then they've got 435 shots to make a difference this time. Everybody's got a district, and they can say, you know what, we're going to take those 24 we put in last time and take it back and give it back to the Republicans. They did a better job than Pelosi did. Or they're going to choose another 24 districts and say, we're going to throw Democrats out there and put Republicans, whatever it is. But this goes back to the voters. And here's the final thing I'll say as we wrap this thing up is, look, in any presidential election, when you look at the actual total of adults that vote, 67% of Americans are registered to vote, 1/3 are not. So out of 330 million Americans, those that are adults and can vote, about 271 million. So you're taking essentially 180 million voters is all that's registered to vote. So out of that, you're going to get about 60% that vote in the election. So you're going to be looking at about 110 million people that vote in the election. And of that, it's going to take about 55 million to win the election. So you're essentially talking about 55 million will choose the next presidential candidate out of 330 million in the country. You're talking about 1/6 of the country will choose the president. And that's only, we're under 20% of the people. That's 1 out of 5 people. So what has to happen is people have to turn out at a higher rate than we're used to. And if good, average, common sense people don't turn out this election, don't vote for president, don't vote to clean Congress up, we're going to keep seeing what we've seen for the last several years. So this really is in our hands. And if we get conservatives and Christians turned out at a higher rate, it will make a difference.
It'll make a huge difference. And part of how you can make that happen, and you can be a force multiplier right there in your community, is to take this program you heard today and share it with your friends and family. Not only this program, but some of our other WallBuilders Live programs. You can do that at our website today at wallbuilderslive.com. Very easy to grab those links and share them on Facebook and all your social media tools. It's also easy to just give people a heads up about the program. We can go to our Facebook page, in fact, and share those posts that we typically do on a daily basis, not only about what our topic is on WallBuilders Live that day, but other areas of the culture. And then if you really want to lead right there from your community, you can become one of our Constitution coaches. Do that today at constitutioncoach.com. It's a great way to be involved. You can take the Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green program and actually be the proctor in your community where you host classes. Let us do all the hard work on the videos, but you get the people in the room, you enjoy the fellowship together, and you become that force multiplier educating people in your community to make a difference and help restore America's constitutional republic. Be sure and visit wallbuilderslive.com today, not only to share those programs and those links, but also to make that one-time or monthly contribution. It takes dollars. It does. We're in a culture war, and to win a war, you got to have finances. And right now, the war is about words, and it's about persuasion, and it's about influencing not only the new generation coming up, but the current generation, and teaching people these principles, teaching them how to vote those principles, not only to have a biblical worldview, but to act on that biblical worldview and make a difference in the elections and make a difference in the education in the community. You get to be a part of all that by going to wallbuilderslive.com today. Thanks so much for listening today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
We stand undivided.